not able to be here, and that has just started. So again, welcome to all of you. Glad to see you. Thank you for your work as church visitors and regional pastors. Our time together today is going to be about 90 minutes. We'll spend about 45 minutes all together. Zach and I will roll through a bunch of slides with some information on there. We'll kind of walk you through all of that stuff. And then we'll take a little bit of a break, come on back to our plenary meeting where we will right away send you off into different groups for church visitors and regional pastors, just like we did a couple of weeks ago if you were at that event. And it's worth mentioning that this is the third of 3 virtual gatherings for 2023. And we are planning the same kind of regimen for next year, 2024. We want to do another gathering. It's scheduled for March the 20th, and then a subsequent one in the fall, and then another orientation session for November. Under the awareness that there are always people kind of finding their way into the spot. And there are always people who've been in the spot for a while who continue to feel like they're new to the spot. There's just so much to keep track of. So we want to continue to provide some resourcing for all of you as we value your work on the ground and value your partnership with us. Let me open with a word of prayer, and then I'll make sure that Zach and I get introduced to you all so that you who have not been with us before know a little bit about who's talking to you. But let's first go to God. Father, thank you for the gift of Zoom and for the gift of one another, for the gift of your call into relationship with you, and for your call into ministry and service to the church. And our hope today, oh God, is that in our time together, our conversation, that you would lead us to be better equipped for answering at least one part of our call to ministry, and that is the roles that we carry as church visitors and regional pastors. We long to see you, of course, but we long to see new gifts, new abilities, perhaps, or deepened gifts and deepened abilities used in the service of the church. So help us with that today. I pray, Lord, that you'd bless all those who are here and all those who are going to be listening and watching later on with your Spirit. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Again, third of 3 sessions. My name is Dave Denhaan. I serve as a ministry consultant with Thrive. I used to be with Pastor Church Resources before our reorganization brought 9 different agencies into one called Thrive. I have been with Thrive for about 6 years. I've served a couple of churches in the CRC before that, one in Minnesota, one here in Michigan. I am married with 3 kids, all of whom are launched. So we are empty nesting, and it's amazing. It's all awesome. We love it. We love our kids too, by the way. I don't want any question about that. I am very glad to be with you. I consider all of you to be colleagues in the ministry of blessing the church and its pastors. And I'm glad to be shoulder to shoulder with you in that work. Yeah, that's enough about me. Zach, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Zach Olson, Christian pastor, been ordained now for 14 years and served 2 churches, one in Southern Ontario and then one in Grand Rapids. But for the last 3 years, I've worked with Pastor Church Resources, now Thrive, with Dave, assisting him and Sean with consultation work, but also focusing on helping pastors discern their fit in ministry and identify both those places where they fit well and where they don't fit so well.
There are such places.
Yeah, what else should I tell him, Dave? I'm married. I really do enjoy all of my kids. And I live in Florida. So
yeah, what a nice spot to be right now.
Certainly is.
Well, I'm going to hand it off right back to you, Zach, just to take us into a little bit of a discussion right off the top.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So recognizing that this is an orientation for church visitors and regional pastors, I think one of the first things we'd love to do is create a space to just see what's on your mind in terms of what would be most helpful for you as we spend this time together. Are there topics we can talk about, questions that we can answer that would really serve you well as you step into this role, perhaps for the first time, or have done this role before and have lingering questions? What can we talk about that would be helpful? And you can feel free to put your answer in the chat or raise your hand, or just go ahead and start speaking. What would be helpful?
I know you guys gave some of the some questions last time, but I was curious if you had kind of a list of questions that are helpful. Maybe not, maybe just generic. I know. So for us, we try to reach every church every 3 years, and sometimes they're in crisis situations, sometimes they're not. But just helpful questions, I guess, to ask.
And John, are you serving as a church visitor?
Correct.
Perfect. Yep. I think certainly when it comes to the breakout time when you're with the other church visitors, Dave will point you to resources about church visiting that we have available, and they do include good questions. And I'm sure Dave will, I'm so sorry, Dave, I'm ceding your conversation here, but even to I guess farm the group for good questions that they found helpful will be useful as well. Great questions. Yeah. And Norm Visser, the regional pastor's role in the Article 17 process. We can certainly talk about that in the breakout room. They may even be able to come up during the all together time because they do serve an important role. Great question. Any other topics, questions related to function, permissions? Well, this will not be the only time, of course, for questions.
Just
but
trying to get in, but I had to
Oh,
unmute
sorry, Jay.
myself. I'm just wondering if there's anything in particular that is helpful for reporting to classes, our individual classes rather, for our regional pastor roles. I mean, I just do one, but I never know if it's done to any kind of standard or anything, which I haven't actually tried to look up. But
So I have that written down, Jim, and we'll talk about that in our breakout room. That's a great question. Spoiler alert, I don't know that we have standard practice. So we can create one. Yeah, Ken, I see you're off mute.
Yes, I was wondering about funding from classes for the regional pastor role, at least, because my churches are quite distant from each other, and I wonder if other regional pastors or church visitors get mileage support or something like that in order to do their work and travel from church to church, or take other pastors out to lunch or that sort of thing.
Yeah, fantastic. Ken, we'll talk about that in our breakout too. Beautiful.
Well, it's a huge question I've struggled to put together, but how do we create a sense of trust both in church visiting and in regional pastor discussions? I mean, that's an ongoing thing, because unless you build trust, transparency doesn't happen. And so we're in a relationship, and there's all kinds of stuff, but I'm just curious how you go about that or what you would suggest. I mean, I've got my own stuff, but I'm wanting to learn between churches and between pastors.
Yeah, that's really good. So Larry, I know you said that you have a thought and an answer that's put together or coming together on that, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the group. Dave, I don't want to create a divergent path here, but might there be time to talk about that at some point during the big group, like near the end? Now, what's your call on that?
Yeah, we're going to have a little bit of time for question and answer and
Okay.
at the end of our time. So we'll do a little bit of info dump after our time here. And there should be plenty of time. Well, plenty might be ambitious. There might be time for some Q&A afterwards. And that'd be a great question to raise again, Larry.
All right. Well, I think knowing that Q&A time is coming up and we've got a good list of questions and topics here, Dave, I'll hand it back to you and we'll continue.
Sounds good, Zach. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen again, everybody, and work our way through some things here. We want to make sure that you are aware of how much we appreciate you, first of all. And there's I would say two things that come to my mind as I think about why it's so valuable that we have a relationship with all of you who are church visitors and all of you who are regional pastors. The first one is your willingness to engage and support churches and pastors. I'm going to call this the church and pastor facing responsibility that you have. We admire and affirm and are so glad for your work with that. And stories come to my mind about people who have done this kind of work without even necessarily having a role that guides them into this work. There's a story of a regional pastor in the Midwest who just made it his business before becoming an RP to go and visit all the churches of Classis. And the same story in Southern Ontario. In fact, I think a pop-up camper might even be involved in that particular story of this pastor taking it upon himself to just make the rounds in the churches of Classis and connect meaningfully with the pastors. And pretty quickly thereafter, I think he might even have become appointed the regional pastor, kind of a natural fit. And I appreciate very much, maybe here I'll tell you just one story about church visitors. There's a story of a church that we were consulting with where there was conflict between the pastor and the council, and between the pastor and the congregation. But at this point, the heat was in that first relationship between pastor and council. And it was in the height of COVID. I had to kind of beam in by way of Zoom. And it was those early days of Zoom where we were all trying to figure out how best to do this. So I show up at the meeting in the form of a laptop parked on a chair, parked on a table in the council room. And I asked the local church visitor to be in the room itself with the folks there who were wrestling with all kinds of stuff there on council. We had asked them if they'd be interested in having everybody on their own device in their own house, but they preferred the council room setting. So we just worked with that. Carried on the meeting as well as possible, even given all the limitations that come with Zoom and with the technology that we had at that point. And came during the course of my conversation with the church visitor afterwards, he just helped me to understand the dynamics in the room while we were having our meeting, and let me know that at one point in the room, one of the office bearers seated off in a corner had his phone out the entire time of the meeting, recording things. Hadn't told anybody that he was recording stuff, hadn't asked for permission, but had the phone out on his lap, recording the whole meeting. And then when the pastor especially spoke, actually lifted the phone out of his lap and towards the pastor to record what the pastor was saying. And the church visitor at the time in the meeting noticed that, observed it, and then let me know about it afterwards, so that I had a little bit more data, you could say, to assess how the meeting itself had gone, number one, and number two, form some protocols around phone usage in the course of Zoom meetings. Just really helpful. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that we hope for and count on in our relationships with regional pastors and church visitors. So we're just very grateful for people like you who are on the ground, able to be there in places that we're at work when we can't be on scene, and able to provide us with your insights, your wisdom, and your knowledge about what's going on there. So that's the first reason why it's so significant that we have this relationship with you, the church visitors and regional pastors. The second one is all the stuff, your availability again as on-the-ground partners of Thrive. And in particular, what I'm thinking about with number 2 here is you feeding us information from your experience on the Classis level, your experience with the churches and the pastors of Classis outside of consultations, your sense of how things are going, what needs there are, what kind of resources would be helpful that we might develop at Thrive to be able to support and resource and equip pastors and congregations better. So a host of reasons why it's, again, important that we have the relationship that we do. And so I'm so glad that we get a chance to be together virtually these 3 times this year. And we're going to continue again, as I said, to do this next year. Zach, I'm going to hand it back to you and just have you think with everyone here about the roles of church visitor and regional pastor.
Absolutely. And so Jim, I'll just note that we've got your question in the chat there, and that'll be a great one for Q&A time later. Perfect. Thanks for that. All right, well, the description of our roles, at least how these roles are created, comes from Church Order Article 42. And 42 talks about 3 Classis functionaries or 3 Classis roles that we appoint persons for, pastors for. That is the church visitor, the church counselors to assist when churches are calling a new pastor, and then the regional pastor. And so I'll just read through this here, and then we can pause for questions here and there, and maybe some comments, Dave, or others if you'd like as well. But 42A says the Classis shall be responsible for appointing persons to provide counsel to churches and to pastors. The Classis shall appoint church visitors to visit each church in Classis on a yearly basis. The Classis shall appoint classical counselors to provide advice to any church in the process of calling a minister of the word. And the Classis shall appoint regional pastors to support ministers of the word and commission pastors. So there's the main article, and then going on to the section 42B now with church visitors. The church visitors shall consist of 1 or more teams of office bearers who are chosen for their experience and their counsel. Team composition shall include a minister of the word and at least 1 other office bearer. Their tasks shall be to ascertain whether the office bearers of the church faithfully perform their duties, adhere to sound doctrine, observe the provisions of the church order, and promote the building up of the body of Christ and the extension of God's kingdom. And at our last session, where we spent time talking about Synod's requirement for church visitors to guide councils and congregations into compliance, we spent a lot of time talking about that. Their task is to ascertain and not to, what's the word I'm looking for, Dave? Maybe not to push into compliance, but to ascertain whether they're in compliance. I didn't use the right vocab there, but I think we all know what I mean, hopefully. We've got a Q&A section in case. Churches are free to call in church visitors whenever serious challenges arise that would benefit from their advice, and the church visitors shall provide Classis a written report of their work. Couple of things out of 42A here that 42B that I'd like to mention. One is, maybe this is going back to 42A. First, the Classis shall appoint church visitors to visit each church in Classis on a yearly basis. What we see this article doing is setting the expectation that church visitors have somewhat of a permanent invitation to every council in Classis that they're appointed to. Dave may talk about this later, but if there ever is, you hear word that something is happening in a church that you're a church visitor for, we see Article 42A as permission for you to initiate a conversation about that, because the church order as expectation is that church visitors will have some kind of access to their council at least once a year. And then there was another question that came up about the role of the church visitors in the Article 17 process. And we have a website that is dedicated to detailing that process step by step so that everybody who's involved in it knows what their roles and responsibilities are. And one of the very first things that our church order and the advice from Synod is that at the first signs of conflict, they recommend that the church council calls in the church visitor for assistance. So that's one of the ways that it connects. Right. Dave, anything you would add to that before I continue on?
No, that's a great point to highlight, Zach. Yeah, just the sense that there's the open invitation to council meetings. Yeah, I think you got it.
Okay.
Have nothing to add.
Well, then we'll move on to 42B, the supplement. And it says there that the Synod encouraged classes to emphasize the importance of church visiting, thereby acknowledging its value for maintaining spiritual health and vitality in the member congregations of classes, and encourage the use of the guide for conducting church visiting found on our website, and or other resources available from the Office of PCR or Thrive as effective tools to that end, this being one of them. And then moving on now to the role of regional pastors covered in Article 42D. The regional pastor's task is to support and encourage all who are pastors and to ensure that newly ordained pastors in the CRC are engaged in a mentoring relationship. This one, if I can, so I have the opportunity to oversee the mentoring program, and I'd say that we have probably about a good 80% of our newly ordained ministers are in that 5-year mentoring relationship. Ideally, we would love to see it at 100%. We know there are always circumstances, but if you can be advocates for that regional pastors in your classes, especially when newly ordained pastors come into your classes who may have already been serving a church for, say, like 3 years, it really is beneficial for them to connect with or stay connected to their mentor for those remaining 2 years. Still here in 42D, regional pastors shall be appointed for a specified term of service. Regional pastors shall be appointed in collaboration with pastor church resources. Often what this looks like is when your classes has nominated you to fulfill the role of regional pastor, your stated clerk will send an email with that, hey, we've nominated so-and-so. It kind of feels like it's an approval process from pastor church resources. What it is it's a vetting process, one in which we really do trust each classe's rights and responsibilities and judgment in appointing people to the regional pastor role. All right.
Maybe the thing that I would add there, Zach, is it's just the sense that we want this to be a partnership with the classes. And this is actually a very little known protocol at this point. It was decided upon back in 2018, I believe, the sense that PCR and classes work together in the identification of the next RP. And our role is not to identify that person, but to make sure that from a Thrive perspective, knowing all that we know about the churches across the denomination, there are no, we're going to call them red flags for any given nominee for that spot. So that's why we get involved a little bit. And then we typically send a note to the class's clerk, who's informed us of the nomination, to say, hey, we don't see any issues here. We applaud your work and are glad that you got the RP slot filled with this person. And then, yeah, the work of classes then is just to officially note that in their minutes so that our folks here at the yearbook office can note that in their records for the yearbook and the database here at the church and all that stuff. So anyway, that's a partnership between Thrive and the classis that is pretty valuable for selecting RPs. That was way too long, but I just wanted to get that point in, Zach.
Yeah, appreciate it, Dave. I think maybe Ken, this was your question about expenses. Regional pastor expenses shall ordinarily be borne by the classis. Annual written reports of the regional pastor shall be provided to classis and copied to PCR Now Thrive. General oversight of the regional pastor program, including development of resource material and training, will be coordinated by Pastor Church Resources Now Thrive. And then finally here, regional pastors assist newly ordained pastors in the selection of a mentor according to the decision of synod. That all candidates for ministry will, upon ordination, engage with a mentor. Each newly ordained minister will be served by a mentor for the first 5 years in ministry. For the first 5 years of ministry of each person who enters the CRC ministry by way of church order articles 7, 8, or 14E, engage with a mentor will be required. And a mentor will be provided for any minister of the word who desires a mentor. And so this would be a place where we would envision and hope to see that if a pastor was seeking a mentor, or a newly ordained pastor came into your classes and didn't have previous connections to the classes, that you as an RP would be a vital connector for them to a possible mentor. And just in case I don't think of this later, while we're thinking about it now, if you are selecting, or if you do have somebody who's new to ministry and they get connected with a mentor in classes they didn't know previously, you would serve that pastor and mentor really well to check in after 6 months, just to see how is this relationship forming? Is it a good fit or not? And then you might be able to be that person who can head off an awkward conversation or an ineffective mentoring relationship by just asking the question and giving them an opportunity to select out and change mentors. That's not church order, that's just a best practice.
Right on, Zach. Terrific. Well, thanks, Zach. Thanks for leading us in that. What I want to do for a minute is just think about what Thrive hopes for and expects from all of you folks. But maybe just before that, just a note as I'm thinking about it here, Zach.
Yeah.
Going back to the church visiting protocol from the church order, something we recognized a couple of weeks ago when we were with all of the church visitors and RPs who were able to attend that session was just the heavy mandate from Synod combined with the underused system of church visiting in many areas of the Christian Reformed Church, and that creating kind of a special problem. And I just want to acknowledge that reality again today with all of you, that there is a wide variety of practice across all the classes, the 49 classes of our denomination. Some classes have robust church visiting programs, and they aren't merely to police whether or not the meeting minutes are in order, but they are actually about the life and health and strength and vitality of each congregation. Meanwhile, there are other classes that have in some ways given up on the program of church visiting. And in part, that's been because of just bad experiences with church visiting as more of a policing action, and everybody being kind of uncomfortable with that posture. So we see this kind of wide variety. I've just described for you the two kind of poles on that spectrum. And you probably find yourself somewhere on that particular spectrum, engaged in the work of church visiting if you're a church visitor, perhaps in a system that's functioning really well, and it's a tight running machine. It's going great. Others of you might be church visitors who are functioning in that role, maybe even without that title necessarily, but you're doing that work because you're on a team that's been assigned to visit a collection of churches in classes. And so again, I just want to acknowledge that variety of practice across the denomination, and that reality is probably expressed here in our meeting today, where we've got church visitors from a wide variety of experiences with the role in classes. All right, again, that was way too long. Sorry about that, folks. I do want to get to Thrive and our hopes and expectations for all of you who serve in these really important offices. Let me just talk about church visitors as opposed to regional pastors. Sometimes those two offices can get intermingled a little bit. And at Thrive, we typically look at the church visiting office as a resource, especially for councils. I think in the past, it's also been a resource for pastors, but since the advent and wider usage of the regional pastor role, the church visitor role has become more circumscribed and focused directly at providing support for councils in our denomination. And yeah, the regional pastor role is especially focused on pastors. And we talk with people from other denominations about the way that they support pastors, and we describe for them our classis system and these functionary roles, and often we'll hear some deep appreciation for these two roles because they're coming from contexts in which there's really very little in the way of support for particular congregations and particular pastors. In other environments, there is that kind of support, typically run by a bishop or a middle judicatory leader who provides that kind of support. But it always seems as if it's not as on the ground, so to speak, as the roles that we have here in the Christian Reformed Church. I'm grateful for these roles, and again for all of your willingness to fill those roles. So that's number one. Number two, the second thing that I'll just think about with you is proactive and responsive ministry for both the church visiting side and the regional pastor side. Our hope, and this is sometimes more aspirational than reality, our hope is that in every classis, there's a way for the churches of classis to experience the concern and compassion of other classis churches in both roles, both proactively and responsively. In the case of church visiting, the proactive ministry takes shape in a church visiting kind of protocol where there's regular meetings on an annual basis, perhaps, or biannual. Sometimes classes will make it every 3 years, but a way in which each classis gets to experience some really good questions from church visitors that lead them to self-reflection and the support of those church visitors, and the opportunity to raise whatever concerns there might be at the council level that might not have a platform anyplace else. That's the proactive ministry that we hope happens for councils. And then, of course, responsibly, if a church is going through stuff, the church visitors are the go-to people for that congregation, so that there's somebody stepping into the system from the outside who has some objective perspective, who has some experiential wisdom, and who doesn't have relationships within the congregation at stake to kind of derail or jeopardize the conversations that need to happen, sometimes hard conversations that need to happen. So on the church visitor side, both proactive and responsive ministry. On the regional pastor side, the same thing. We hope for regional pastors who are able to visit with pastors proactively on a rotating basis, perhaps, or whenever it's convenient to call up a particular pastor and have coffee with that person. We certainly hope that that's a part of the work. And we also hope for a responsive kind of ministry from our regional pastors, so that if a pastor is going through an Article 17 process or staff stuff, and you know what that's like, or conflict with somebody else on council, the regional pastor becomes that responsive kind of support person. I'm going to maybe make an analogy to a paramedic who comes in and responds to a crisis or a trauma, something along that line, and can be of great help to that pastor who often feels alone and isolated. So the RP is a terrific support for that person. So again, proactive and responsive, both on the church visiting side and the regional pastor side. And our experience, especially in church visiting land, is that classes will elect to do one or the other. The responsive piece, in other words, they'll have paramedics on standby, or the proactive piece, they'll have church visiting teams that are sent out throughout the classes with a list of 2 or 3 or 4 churches to visit. Our hope is actually that classes are ready, willing, and able to do both of those things. Well, we're going to have a session here after our question and answer time in the larger group to get into some of the nuts and bolts with regard to regional pastors and church visitors. So we can certainly do that, but before we do that, let's just think, what do you want us to know about the challenges that you think about in relation to your class's work? And I'm going to stop sharing here so I can see all of your faces again here pretty quick. But again, the question is, what do you want us to know about the challenges that you think about in relation to your class's work as a church visitor or as a regional pastor? And again, I'm going to take a little bit of notes here from what we hear from you guys, from you folks. What would you like us to know? What do you experience that's challenging? Or you've given us some questions to think about already, but I guess this is an invitation for you to tell us what it's like to walk in your shoes in these classes functionary roles.
Dave, I see Mike's hand. Mike, go ahead, come off mute and love to hear what
Yeah.
yours.
One, I guess, maybe a technical question that I have is, it seems to me, and I think we experience it when, our council has received a church visit. We've always been receptive to those, but the proactive, reactive thing, and I'm with you on that. But sometimes it seems as though when we reach out as church visitors to a council and request some time at a meeting, if there is some simmering conflict that hasn't gotten to a crisis point yet, they're hesitant to engage that. So we get a kind of a Badunkia letter, and thanks, but no thanks. And, is there some initiative expected on the part of the church visitor to push that a little bit if we've heard something? And then, because sometimes we don't get called until things have reached a crisis, and it's hard to be proactive when you get called into a crisis.
What a terrific question. I think I saw Norm applauding your question. I think that's what you were doing, wasn't it, Norm?
Norm was not sure which one of his icons to tap on, but I can echo that, and I think, at the risk of talking like November today, it's, you talk about the wide variety, and Mike identifies, like, you don't get called in as a church visitor, or perhaps even as a regional pastor, but part of that is, you can talk about, all the wonderful initiatives, but very few of us have lived experience of positive, good functioning church visits or regional pastors, and I mean, on the one hand, you get sort of shrugged off if there's any hint, but I can't count the number of church visit reports that I've read from councils I served, and I don't recognize the church because everything is so glowing and wonderful, and nothing. So it's really hard to get invested into a process that just does, even when it's done, doesn't seem to do much. So it is November.
Yeah, right on. Oh, that's so good, Nora. That's reality, right? And we encounter some of the same stuff at PCR or Thrive, where we're aware of something going on, but we have no leverage until council invites us, because it's the council, of course, that has original authority. But there are some things you can do in response. I mean, there are ways to build relationships with key leaders that create the platform for a request that you come and visit. And that's engaging the council chair over coffee or something along that line, something that might be less threatening to that council in preparation for what you might want to accomplish later on in a full-scale council visit. So creating those relationships is, it's time consuming, but it's really critical. The other thing that I would say, Mike, in response to your really, really good question, is that it's always worth a conversation at the classis level. And not merely to say, hey, gang, what do you think about church visiting? But to have at the ready some reasons why church visiting would actually be a blessing. And to make sure that folks are operating with that paradigm rather than with the old kind of policing paradigm. You know, how your church, how your meeting minutes, and are your books in order, and is the pastor being paid well enough, and all that kind of stuff. But questions that might instead be the questions that arise like out of Philippians 1, where Paul says, I give thanks every time I remember you. And a good church visiting protocol might be to take that text as your devotional text at a given meeting, and then look up from your text, from your phone, your scripture, your Bible, whatever, and just ask the question, what might Paul have to give thanks for if he were to visit this church? And have that become the platform then for a really robust conversation about what's going well or what's going poorly. And training them to see things through a biblical lens, or certainly through the Apostle Paul's eyes, to try to guess what he might give thanks for. That kind of creative conversation might create enough goodwill for that church even to say to the other churches and classes, you know, it wasn't awful. Maybe, you know, we could do this. So there are some ways to kind of tackle strategically that challenge, Mike, because I think everybody around the table here, whether it's you're a regional pastor or a church visitor, recognizes that as a challenge.
I jump in here a little bit, Dave, with a
Well, I just want to honor the fact that Ken's got his hand up, and then Larry will get to you.
totally
Ken?
good. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Yeah, one thought that came to my mind as I was waiting for you to finish there is that a well-funded church visiting team could offer to bring a meal for council, and might get your foot in the door a little easier that way.
Yeah, there you go.
My other thinking is that I'm a new regional pastor, and I've only had maybe one personal visit from a regional pastor in 20 years or so. So I don't really know what they're supposed to look like or how often they really should happen. You know, I really don't have a guideline to go by, so I kind of feel like I'm flying by the seat of my pants. And
yeah, I think there's probably a lot of that going around. Yeah. And part of what I might say to that is, imagine what kind of a visit would bless you, and then try to fashion that kind of a visit for the folks under your care, whether it's for a pastor or a council. But yeah, I can remember back at Fairway, I was there for 18 years. I think we had one church visit over the course of that decade and a half and change. And it was a fine visit. Made me kind of wish there were more, but there wasn't energy for that in our particular classes. Let's see, Larry, you had something you were going to talk about.
This is no panacea. We are just beginning at In-Classis, Wisconsin, and I want to give credit to Jason Rice, who is the chair of the Classis Renewal Committee. But essentially, what we've done is within classes to break the classes down into 3 geographical clusters, and then to seek to have the pastors within those clusters form their own pastoral cluster. In our area, we call it the 6 team. I've got your 6, I've got your back, kind of a thing where we pray for each other to meet. But the idea then would be that in each of those 3 clusters, there would be a regional pastor. So instead of having one regional pastor serving all of the churches in the state of Wisconsin, mostly, or maybe even 2 if we're fully staffed. Now we're actually having, the goal then is, we've got 2 right now, and we're going to be appointing a 3rd for that 3rd cluster, so that you have somebody within the cluster pastoring the pastors, and then seeking to get to know the churches and the pastors at a level that can build trust, which is one of the barriers. What do I say? That's one of the things where the policing thing comes in. Oh yeah, everything's fine, blah 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 blah, and then you go home, and 2 weeks later you hear, oh yeah, there was an Article 17 in the works, but they wouldn't tell us. You know, so in other words, that's an approach that we're beginning to take, and I'm excited about that, to see where it actually goes, because it's taking a certain reality into it and saying it's got to be a relational thing that builds trust. between pastors and within the congregations through frequency of conversation and people that they know and can trust, not somebody from outside, from afar, who's going to write formal, judicial report.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Larry. That's an example of a classes that's done some good work in thinking about how do we make a program that fits, that's sustainable, that doesn't turn people off, that really is fruitful and helpful for the churches. Because the aim really is for the thriving of the congregations and the thriving of the pastors. And whatever we can do to contribute to that, to help that along, awesome. Zach, there are some questions along there in the chat, and my bandwidth isn't enough to kind of keep track of all that, but what might you recommend as a question for us to think about?
Yeah, so a couple of the questions that have been coming up, some about how do you keep track of expenses and how are they submitted? Like, is there a good app for that? Jim, appreciate that you still use a file cabinet, assuming that it's metal and maybe you have a magnet clip that goes, yeah, fantastic. Some of the other questions we could talk about here would be, sorry, and so as I was reading these, I might have tuned out and missed this question, but remember earlier Larry talked about how do we create trust. Is that one you want to deal with here, or did we talk about that already while I was zoned out?
Yeah, we just dealt with that completely, Zach. I'm not sure what planet you're on, but no, we didn't deal with
and I have no idea if you're
I am totally yanking your
okay, fantastic. That might be a good one. How do we create trust in us as regional pastors and church visitors?
Yeah, again, trust
discussions.
Trust is it's something you win. Often it's easily lost, but you trust a person when that person's been open and honest with you. I trust you when I have shown you something of myself and you've handled that wonderfully with respect. It's almost like in telling you a story about my life, I've kind of taken my heart out of my chest, put it on the table, and everybody can see it beating there on the table. And instead of rolling over it, you find ways to honor that heart of mine. And maybe it's the worse than rolling over it, you ignore it. That would be a way to break trust. But building trust is when I know something about you. I know that you know something about me, and you're holding it in a way that honors me, that helps me, that makes life more fruitful. Now, how to do that on a church visiting setting or regional pastor setting, that's something that you'll have to think about a little bit more. But just basically building trust is all about having a place to share who I am and having that sharing be honored. I think when who is it now? Jim, who am I thinking of, everybody? The 5 dysfunctions of a team, that guy. Jim Scazzaro, I think. He talks about trust in exactly that way, and advocates for places where there is no trust. There would be a conscious exercise, an intentional exercise of sharing, where people have the opportunity to decide how they'll respond to what's been shared. And the guidance provided in an event like that is aimed at honoring what's been shared as a way to build trust in the room. Yeah, we could talk about, trust is a topic that so many writers have tackled. We could talk about that for a long time, but I'm looking at the clock and thinking maybe we have time, Zach, for one more. If there's another question we could handle in just a couple of minutes, that'd be great. And then we'll just go to a bit of a break and then come back for our breakouts.
Yeah, certainly. So, just on the trust one real quick, just because I can't resist. One of the things is, being present and getting to know the church. And so I realize there are all kind of practical and logistical challenges with that. If you're showing up when there's a problem, and it's the first time that you're showing up to that church, you shouldn't expect a high degree of trust personally for that. And I realize we can't all make it to to loads and loads of social functions at other churches, but I would recommend using your classes time if you're a church visitor to connect with the delegates from those churches that you're responsible for, just as a real brief check-in. At least they have a name and a face connected to each other, and that might help when you're called in a difficult situation. So Dave, am I correct in thinking we got about 5 minutes for a question?
Yeah, I think so.
So an easy one might be classes funding for the regional pastor CV role, mileage support. Maybe just to get a sense from the group, how are they supported? What are some expectations that they have in terms of visiting churches, particularly that are at great distances? What's covered? Do they have a budget? Any of that kind of information would be really helpful to share.
Yeah, that's
We've
great.
got everybody together.
What can you share with us and with everybody else here at the table? What's your practice? Yeah, Rick.
So, yeah, and this is kind of funny because I'm also on the finance team for our classes, and just became regional pastor. Noticed there was no money set aside for that, and so I was like, "Well, man, I've got some. We have a very spread out classes, and so we threw some money in for mileage and dinners, right, and even a little bit extra for like some overnight stuff if needed, and we figured we'd throw it in there for about $1,200. That just gave a little breathing room for the 3 regional pastors that we have in our classes, and just be able to go, hey, here's some funds to take if they're close enough, take guys out for coffee if there's long distance, to be able to have some mileage. So, and one of the things we found is a couple of the regional pastors in the past kind of hadn't done some of this stuff because it was coming out of their pocket. So if this is something, so that's kind of what we put before classes and say, if this is of value to us, then we should try to figure out a way to be able to fund it. So we did.
Nice. Yeah, that's terrific, Rick. Thanks for sharing. Does that sound familiar to anybody, or is your practice different?
Yeah, and I think it'd even be really helpful to, like Rick did, name, we have this many dollars set aside for our regional pastors or church visitors, because we get the question often, just like it was raised here, is what's normal, what's average. It'd be great to give some real dollars to folks.
We have at Classes Niagara $1,000, and over COVID for 3 years, there was virtually nothing done shared between the 2 regional pastors that we have. And so this past year, I just went a little bit nuts and overspent the budget, figuring that there was a lot of money, more or less, in surplus, and nobody wrapped my fingers or anything like that. And they even said that if I still wanted, I could go to the regional pastor thing. So unfortunately, I can't. But anyway, I would say, my code for living is do it first and ask forgiveness later.
Yep. That's a great recipe. Sometimes. Thanks, Jim.
Depends on your treasurer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll share what we do with regional pastors in Grand Rapids East. We have 2, and that's partly because we decided to expand the role to any pastor who's 20 hours a week or more at any of our congregations.
Yep, that's a jump.
And yeah, that's a jump. So we have 2, and we kind of divided the list between us. We are also paid to be regional pastors, 10 hours a month and $200 a month is what we're paid. But then we have a very well-funded budget for taking people out for coffee and for dinner. We have money to organize a retreat if we would want one. or if we thought that would be important for the pastors. This past month for Pastor Appreciation Month, we wrote each of our pastors a thank you note and included a $10 gift card to a local coffee shop. So yeah, I think our classes really recognizes how valuable that is to have active regional pastors. And because it's a job and you're trying to keep track of how many hours you put in, it does help you be a lot more consistent in making those proactive coffee dates and dinner dates and things like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Thea. That's
Yep.
great. Well, let's take our break for a little bit here. We'll take a break for maybe 5 minutes, and then let's come back at 25 till the hour. Excuse me. And at that point, I'll take the church visitors and do a little bit of work with you folks, and Zach will take the regional pastors, do a little bit of work with you all. And at the end of both of those sessions, there's more opportunity for question and answer. Because again, we want to be answering questions that you're actually asking. We don't want to just dump stuff on you. We want to be helpful to you guys. So we'll do some of that again at the end of our next session. But let's meet up here in about 5 minutes, about 25 to the hour. Thanks, everybody.
Are they just going to keep us here chatting to each other aimlessly, or are they breaking us up?
That's the goal. We're just secretly listening for anything interesting that might come up.
It wasn't so secret.
We're still waiting. I'm just kidding.
So you're trying to create community and trust that we'll share more later, right?
That's
I get it. I get it. You're assuming, Zach, that we have the emotional intelligence for that.
I think I'm pretty safe to assume that, Doug. You bet. Yeah.
I wonder what algorithm we
Does
could
the-
come up with that would help us to say whether the contributions are interesting.
Is the FBI or RCMP getting a copy of this?
Yeah, we
They're
can't.
probably
touch that.
watching, right, Jim?
We can't. touch
So I know that there is some AI that can do that. Because Dave, I think I was telling you about you can take your video and then there's this AI site that will put it into like 60 to 90-second clips. And it will tell you how interesting it is. Like it'll rank the clips in order of, you know, this has got a grabbing title. It offers practical advice. It's like an 84% kind of clip.
Our prime minister would mess that up. So, well, can I say that out loud? Sorry, Justin. Sorry, Justin. There's no photo op for you.
No.
I was going to say I had somebody in my.
See that I've written to Dave and he's written and
I didn't read it.
Oh.
What was that, Rick?
I'm actually paying attention.
I was going to say I had somebody in my first church that would do that on a weekly basis. So
But you're writing an email.
Well,
I
that's
was ahead of the times.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. Can anybody relate to that story I told about the council where the person at the back of the room was holding up their phone? I mean, just no concept of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate in a meeting. And yeah, we ended up having to write up a little bit of a protocol that we wished we didn't have to, but and then we all got so good at Zoom that some of those protocols we wrote up, some of those instructive kinds of things. This is how you do this. This is how we just didn't bother using because we all got really good at Zoom and kind of better at the etiquette related to Zoom. Well, everybody, we are well on our way to the top of the hour here pretty quick. So I'm just going to jump on in. And Zach, could you take with you, I'll put it that way, take with you all of the regional pastors, or at least provide a link to that meeting. And then I'm going to hang on to all the folks who are church visitors here in this meeting room.
Yep, certainly. So you can, if you're a regional pastor, please choose to join this breakout room I'm creating. Otherwise, feel free to stay behind if you're a church visitor.
There we go. So Zach, I see, oh, there we go. Yeah.
I'm going to join them too. You all have fun.
Thanks, Zach. See you later. All right. All right, gang. I think this is it. It's all of us church visitors. Let me share my screen again, and I'm just going to walk you through a few things here. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, what is a church visitor's job? Let's just think about some more specifics for a little bit here. And the way that we think about the church visitor's job at Thrive here is to represent the classis's care and concern for individual congregations. It's a community building program, hopefully. It's to some degree an accountability program, hopefully, of churches to the classis. Yeah, we believe very strongly that the council holds original authority, that the classis has delegated authority, but we're also covenantal thinkers, and we understand that we are in relationship to one another that's more than just being nice, but is also an accountability. So this is an instrument to enact that kind of accountability. But even more than that, it's an instrument to experience the blessing of classis and the help of classis and the support of classis. The second thing I'd mention is just the advocacy for the congregation's well-being. We've mentioned this a couple of times along the way already, that another way to think in general terms about your work is to enable a congregation to experience, in some respects, its best life, or at least thriving in fruitfulness. And that often becomes a point of discussion among leadership, asking leaders, how are you doing in the role? How are you able to experience the blessing of Christ as you're carrying out this church visiting work, or excuse me, this elder, deacon, and pastoring work? And is there a sense that you feel God blessing your congregation with ministry that's fruitful? So advocating for the congregation's well-being. And we see this in church visiting programs across the denomination, where there will be a kind of a robust program in place. The church visits are being made, and I get to look at the class meeting minutes and read some of the reports that the church visitors are providing in those contexts. And very often it's pretty rich reading, in the sense that church visitors are reporting on wonderful ministry, good programming, and that sort of thing. The other wonder that I have, and you probably have this already, is are the reports including the hard spots, the challenging conversations, the difficulties that churches are experiencing? First of all, have the churches been willing to share that stuff? And secondly, have the church visitors been given permission to share that on a broader level at the classis meeting? Those are always wonders with me as I'm reading those classis meeting minutes and hearing and reading those reports. Number 3, provide church order wisdom when needed. And how about those Article 17s that almost nobody does on a regular basis, but so many are finding their way into those hard conversations and feeling utterly lost in those conversations. And then they come to you. Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Church Visitor, or whatever. Can you help us sort through the steps, the sequence, the timing? How about that severance package? What should go into those considerations? When does severance begin? I mean, all those hard conversations that nobody does on a regular basis. And you're entrusted with that responsibility and have to kind of own so much material, so much data, so much knowledge. And that's where the Article 17 website is hopefully our gift to you, because it spells out pretty clearly what's expected of pastors, what's expected of councils, what's expected of the classis, and so on. But all that to say that the church order wisdom is something that councils look to you for. And sometimes that's a big lift, because there's a lot of church order. And then finally, number 4, support and encouragement in difficult times. When a church is going through relationship tension with its pastor, and the council chair has been spending sleepless nights wondering, how do I raise this topic with our sensitive or prickly or whatever pastor? And hopefully they know that there's a church visitor ready at hand, and can set up a meeting, with you, the church visitor, and have that conversation. Or maybe it's a group of elders and a group of deacons that are at odds. And here's what we run into quite a bit. Maybe you run into it as well, where deacons are treated by the elders as elders in waiting, kind of junior partners. And they have a habit of springing decisions on the deacons and expecting the deacons to kind of rubber stamp what the elders have done. And the deacons, after a while, get pretty sick of that treatment and either begin to check out or begin to revolt. And then you might get called into a conversation like that and try to provide some help and assistance and guidance and counsel to people involved in that situation. So again, support and encouragement in all those difficult times. And that brings me to my next slide here, promising practices. If you don't have this website in your church visitor kind of website collection, I would urge you to put it there. It'll take you to a web page that's been there actually for a number of years already, but it provides some really good guidance for both the proactive and the responsive kinds of ministry that we've been talking about. And again, that's just crcna.org/classes/church visitor promising practices. Again, a really great website for you to have at the ready for when you yourself are being called upon to provide service to a church. Yeah, if you need that website up again, I'm going to go to my next slide here, but if you need that, I'll put that in the notes that will accompany the video to go out to all you folks after this meeting. Let's think about accountability for a minute, because we do get this question every once in a while. To whom are the church visitors, and for that matter, the regional pastors, accountable? And of course, the accountability is to the classis via reports, whether they're verbal or written. And one of the questions we get most often is, what should be in those reports? And as Zach mentioned early on, there really is not a template for church visitor reports or regional pastor reports. But if there's some confusion about that, my recommendation would be to ask classis leadership what they think would be wise for the classis to hear when they have that classis meeting and the church visitor report comes up and you're asked to stand and deliver. What would they like you to deliver? So have that conversation with the CIC chair or whoever that person in that position might be, and just ask that question. What would bless the classis? What would bless the classis to know as we conduct our work? And maybe even give thought in that conversation to what happens in a sensitive situation where there's really hard stuff going on in a church. How much does a classis need to know? How much would it be blessed to know? How much would equip it for prayer for that hurting congregation? And how much would just feed the gossip mill? Good conversation to have, again, with your church, your classis leadership. Yeah, that's the accountability piece. Let me see what's next here. Who supports you? Yeah, who supports you? Well, number one, as you're thinking about doing your work in a context of support, the first people to think about are indeed the folks in classis leadership. When you have questions about how to function in the role, we're always at the ready to help you, but it might be best to check in with classis leadership first so that their expectations and your expectations align. And then if you were to follow up with Thrive and ask, what are Thrive's expectations? We can speak into that conversation that you're already having at the classis level. So certainly classis leadership is super key for all you folks who are involved in church visiting, and making sure those relationships are in order, that you're having that connection on a semi-regular basis would be important. The second avenue of support that I want to raise for your thought and attention is your fellow church visitors, your colleagues. in that ministry. A number of great ideas were floated already today in our gathering here, and I would expect the same dynamic to take place when you're talking with church visitors in your local classes. Sharing wisdom, sharing experiences. Something that I was going to raise everybody's attention to earlier in our session was Mike's suggestion that you send churches the questions that you plan to ask ahead of time. That's the kind of how-to that would come up in a conversation with your colleagues. It's a great suggestion, by the way. Not only is it pastorally wise, but it communicates to the church that you're in this for their benefit, that you want to bless them. So your church visiting colleagues are always going to be hopefully an avenue of support. And then finally, all of us here at Thrive, we have a pretty larger team than we did when we were just PCR. So there's Zach, Sean, and myself, Sean Baker, who are former PCR ministry consultants, but there's also Amanda Benkhuizen from Safe Church, and we've just hired a colleague to work with her. There's Reggie Smith, who's part of our consulting team. There's Tim Rekirk, who's in charge of all the chaplains out there, but is also a consultant with us. So we've got a great team and lots of wisdom, I think, to share with you whenever there are questions that arise. So we have those, we have resources available on our website, lots of stuff for you to peruse, to take a look at, and to consider. And we value, again, the relationship that we have with all of you. And if there are ways that we can be of support, you're always free to reach out and talk to and call us. Let's see, what is next? Oh, yeah, question and answer time. Let me stop sharing and come back to you. As we were beginning our time together today, everybody, somebody raised for me just the hardship of the 17s out there, and the 14s are sometimes really difficult. And of course, the 82, 83, 84 situations. Oh my goodness, there's just plenty of challenge there to go around. So those questions are still in my brain a little bit as I'm walking you through this stuff, but I'm wondering if there are any items of wisdom that you might have to share, or questions that you have that we could tackle together in our remaining time together. We've got 10 or so minutes. Or if you've got a favorite ministry recipe that has been helpful to you, that might be helpful to all of us, hey, let's hear from you. What do you got? What might help, or how can we help you?
So for me, if it's okay for me to share, I'm supposed to be the church visitor alternate. And our classes, I'm coming from classes Rocky Mountain. We don't have a set of an annual visit towards the church. So our CIC is starting the conversation. It may become necessary, and how we are to handle all different kinds of matters. So we are initiating a kind of, I don't know the full history of our classes. I think there might have been, but through pandemic, it might have gotten kind of difficult and all that. So I'm a kind of youngster here to kind of help out the elderly regional pastor and church visitors. But I'm kind of caught in between the expectation of the denomination, because we recently received the email from our clerk, and somehow we had a transition of the clerk, and then the emails were kind of missing out. So within our classes, there's a lot of things going on. At the same time, I'm trying to get to know what an alternate is expected to do as a church visitor. So
yeah, thank you, Daniel. Well, first of all, thanks for your service to the church. And the alternates, whether it's stated clerk or regional pastor or church visitor, it's almost like that line at the bottom of every job description: all duties as assigned by supervisor. And so much can fit under that, right? But basically, we see the alternates as those who would be ready to step in should the church visitor, the designated church visitor, be unavailable for a particular conversation. So it's a little bit of a challenging spot. I mean, it's like being at the ready, but not knowing when you're going to be called upon. And that is part of the challenge of any alternate out there. So it's going to mean for you, Daniel, and for other alternates as well, being in pretty regular contact with those that you are working with, just to say, what's on the horizon? What do I need to be thinking about in preparation for a hard conversation that's off of the wings that's going to take center stage here pretty soon? And that communication piece is going to be pretty critical.
If it's okay for me to piggyback on that one,
please. Yep.
it feels a bit like our church visitors are trying to protect me from the harms, because we have a lot of Article 17s that are happening. So I'm not encouraged to participate in the church visiting, but I'm not too sure if I need to be a little bit more proactive to get involved, because if a church visitor becomes unavailable for such visiting and I'm not even trained or prepared for such visit when it does, and it's a very serious matter. So I think if there were any guidelines that the Thrive has set for how to train or equip the church visiting alternate or whatnot, I think this is the conversation that our classes particularly is missing. So yeah.
I'm hearing you ask maybe two things. One is, how do I get in the game? Maybe that's one thing. And I think that's a conversation with classes leadership to say, put me in, coach. I'm ready to go and I want to serve the church and I'm teachable. So that's just the communication piece, I think. And I can't imagine a classes interim committee out there that would say, oh, you're ready to go. Yeah, well, I don't think we need you. I mean, I can't imagine that. There might be some out there, but having somebody at the ready would be terrific. And I know that Classis Rocky has had a number of situations, and my observation has been that Classis Rocky, even in its kind of unprepared state, has served crisis situations actually pretty well. But it's been a matter of scrambling to assemble some teams, and you'd love to get to a spot where you don't have to scramble every time a crisis emerges. So make yourself available. And then in terms of the second question that I'm hearing you ask is just about training, ongoing training. And I think the website that I shared with you a little bit ago related to promising practices, if there's anything I'd recommend is to take a look at all of that stuff and become pretty well-versed in some of those concepts there and those practices. And then it's going to be a matter of just gaining experience, being with churches in tough spots or being in churches with great conversations and being available for that. But again, Daniel, thanks for signing up for the alternate work. Not glamorous, but it's so important for the church. Yeah, anybody else? Any thoughts on what Daniel's wanted to think about, or maybe your own thoughts? John?
I guess for me, I mean, somewhat similar position to Daniel, just in the sense of I'm young and don't have a ton of experience and learning along the way. And I'm grateful that when we do church visits, we tend to send 2 visitors, and we tend to have one who kind of leads the conversation and one who more takes notes along the way. And I've appreciated being the note taker at the beginning, as I kind of get to watch somebody else lead it before I have to. And so I don't know, Daniel, if you have opportunities, even to just say, can I just go? I don't need to say anything. Like, let me gain that experience, so that if it's not this situation, I can be helpful in the next one.
Yeah, that's a great word, John. Yeah, and ideally you are going out as teams, not as individual church visitors, just so that you can handle the stuff, writing, taking notes, asking questions. Yeah, it's pretty rare to find somebody who can do all of that well at the same time. So that's a great note. And Dan, you might just think about saying to the visiting teams, could I come? I don't even need a role. I just want to watch and learn and absorb. Yeah, anybody else? thoughts to share, tricks of the trade, anything like that? Doug?
I guess, Dave, part of my concern comes in, again, I'm going to be going to another classes and doing another Article 17
Yeah.
very soon. And I'm finding that we don't care for the spouse of the minister being Article 17 very well.
Mm.
And again, we don't have a lot of provision for that, but I think it would be smart for us to look at how we can do that. But I'm looking at churches that are, and churches that aren't being made to get a church counselor. And if they do, they're not engaging in it well. And the same is with young ministers coming into the ministry who aren't making use of their mentor well. Some of them, or a lot of them, are getting articled out.
Yeah.
I'm noticing. And I'm wondering about the emotional intelligence, and that's above our pay grade right now. But that goes to candidacy and how we're placing churches, how we walk with a church to mentor churches that are hiring young ministers right out of seminary.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we do that well. And I think that would help lower our Article 17s.
Yep. And
I'm finding it difficult because even the plans for someone to re-enter the ministry, I don't want to be a cop doing this, but have we done the emotional work that we're ready? And when we do, because I'm a synodical deputy as well, so I have two of these roles. When churches are going to call a minister again, are they ready? And how do we prepare the minister to be healthy enough to go into another church and not get articled again?
Yeah.
And we're not, I don't see these questions or the minister or the churches at least willing to wrestle with this. I don't know.
A couple things I might add, Doug. The church counseling position is underutilized universally. I'd love to see classes adopt a standing position of church counselor who's available whenever a church becomes vacant. Somebody who knows the process, who knows when to assert him or herself and when that's not needed. And there are some key moments in the call process when it'd be really helpful to have an outside voice saying, "Hey, everybody, are you sure about this?" And then you, as you say, the number of Article 17s might well come down a little bit as those questions of fit become less and less ugly. But I think that's an important thing to think about. I think the church visiting role itself is also underutilized. But there are bigger questions that are above our pay grade that you're asking there. One is related to the candidacy process itself. In some respects, it's a wonderful process because it allows so many voices to enter the conversation as a person is preparing for ministry. Voices that are significant, whether it's a seminary or a classis or a mentor or what have you. The challenge, though, with having so many voices enter in is that there are many gates along the way that are yes/no gates. And everybody who's encountering a gate is assuming everybody else at every other gate is doing their job. And sometimes those assumptions prove correct, and sometimes they don't prove quite so correct. And then you get to the end of the process, and that final gate, everybody's saying, well, they've been through all these gates already. They must be ready to go. So let's just say yes. Or conversely, at the beginning of the process, everybody's saying, well, I hate to say no to this person. There are many gates along the way where the no that needs to be said will be spoken. Oh, and you just wish for people at those various gates along the way to understand that they do have a job. It's really important to say that no if need be, or to say that yes if need be. And you've got two spots from which to see all this, Doug, the church visitor spot and the synodical deputy spot. And wherever you have opportunity, and this goes for everybody here at the table, wherever you have opportunity to encourage church counselors to do their good work. But I'm really thrilled that we could have this time together to chat, to think, and in a minute to pray together. Thank you again for your work as church visitors. our denomination is a better place because of folks like you who are speaking and advocating for church health in your congregations of your classes. So just know that we are grateful for you here at Thrive. We're blessed to have you as our ministry partners. And yeah, thanks, Mike. And glad that we are part of a team together. The team has fault lines, no question. The team faces challenges in our denomination, no question. But as much as we can possibly be together, we need to do that. And today is an evidence of that ethos. So thank you for that. I would love to lead us in a closing prayer, but I also know that there are other good prayers here around the table. So if you would like to lead us in prayer, please let me know. Anyone? You're all just tired of praying at all the events that you're at, aren't you? Well, then let me lead us to God. Let's go. Oh God, we are so grateful for the leadership and love of Jesus. And we are so grateful that we get to be a part of the bride that belongs to him. We praise you for calling us into this family of faith and for calling us into ministry. We recognize that there are challenges that are above our pay grade, so to speak. We pray for your wise and beautiful hand to be in our lives, to give us wisdom, discernment, patience, and endurance as we encounter hard conversations. And would you also, Father, give us those moments of rich joy when we encounter a church that's doing well, or a beautiful ministry story, and there are kingdom signs aplenty. Help us to see that as well, and to have those memories and those images in our mind as we encounter the hard stuff. In any case, lead us by your Spirit to be people who bring glory to you and blessing to our congregations, and by extension, blessing to our communities. We pray all of this in the lovely name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you again, everybody. God bless you. I'll be sending out a note just with the video attached and maybe a few things to keep in mind. So thanks you all. Bye-bye now.